Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul and with the Dicey review, and tonight we're going to be talking about two-player games. I'm really excited to talk about these games because my wife and I play a lot of two-player games. In fact, it's one of our favorite pastimes when we have the time or when we're not exhausted to play a board game. So these games have seen a lot of mileage in my collection. We recently had a comment in one of the videos that said, hey, we're about to go on lockdown here again in France. Do you have any recommendations for two-player games? And I thought to myself, boy, do I. I've played a lot of two-player games in my time, and so I put my thinking cap on and I decided to make this list. I'm going to be talking about 5 two-player games in the video tonight, and hopefully this list will be helpful for you. Now, I want to make a couple of caveats. I have not played every game, so there is a high possibility that I may not talk about a two-player game that you really love. These are just games that I have played and that I love, so just take that with a grain of salt. And then the other thing is I like a very specific type of game, so I'm not going to feature a ton of two-player games that are just really heavy, like take that, combat, really attack your neighbor. There is definitely interaction in the games that I have on my list, but they don't feel just terribly mean, at least to me, just because whenever I'm playing a board game, I like to try and do well on my own side or do well with my own engine that I'm building, but I don't necessarily love to just tear down my opponent's engine. That's not always fun. It can be okay in the right type of game, but that's not really my bread and butter. It's not my cup of tea. So those two caveats out of the way, let's get to the list. The first two-player only game that I want to talk about is Targi. Now, Targi is a two-player only game that was out of print for a long time. It was tough to get, but it's since come back into distribution, and it's available widely now. And Targi is a fantastic game. It takes about an hour to play, realistically, but Targi feels like one of those games that was really designed well and designed only for 2 players. Now, sometimes whenever you play a two-player only game, you might say that you're playing a piece of a larger game, right? Like Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small. It's a fantastic game, but it's kind of just one piece of the larger Agricola. Targi was a game that was designed for itself. It wasn't designed as kind of an offshoot of a bigger experience. Targi is the experience. It's got such a cool setup where you have a 5x5 grid of cards in the middle of the table, and you have all of these border cards, and then you have cards in the middle of this player board area, of the main playing area. And what you do is you're placing workers along the edge of this grid of cards. And you can't place workers that are on top of another worker, and you also can't place a worker if it's directly opposite of one of your workers or an opposing worker. So you have to place on different spaces. But once you place all of your workers, you activate all of the spaces around the edge of the board to do cool things, and then where your workers intersect, the line of where your workers have intersected, you also get to place little markers there where you get to resolve cards in the middle. So that alone is fantastic. There's this really cool puzzle of figuring out, where do I want to place my workers on the edge of the board, and then where do I want them to meet in the middle to allow me to do what I want to do. But on top of that, you're also building a cool tableau in your own player area. And how you build this tableau is huge for your gameplay, for your engine. Some of the cards that you put into your tableau will give you benefits or things that will help you throughout the gameplay, but then additionally, you can also place cards down in your tableau that will allow you to have in-game scoring, because the types of cards that you have in your tableau matters for points at the end of the game. All of these decisions are built into this tiny little box that looks like it's not going to be a very big game experience, and then you have it in your collection and you realize that this is a fantastic standalone experience with a wonderful engine, lots of great decisions, lots of great gameplay, and an expansion that you can get if you really want to dig into that experience even more. Targi is a fantastic game, and for a two-player only experience, it always comes to the top of my mind. Alright, so the next game that I want to talk about is Codenames Duet. Duet is a version of Codenames, which was an original base game that was released and I believe won the Spiel des Jahres when it came out. Codenames is a fantastic party game where you are given a clue card and you have a grid of words on the table in front of you, and you're trying to get your teammates to guess specific words, and the way that you do that is you draw connections between words. So for instance, if you see 3 words out on the table that can somehow be tied together with a one-word clue, you give that clue. So let's say, for instance, that the the cards that you need to guess, there's lizard, leaf, and money out on the table. You could say green 3, right? Now, there's a bit of a risk because most lizards are kind of green, and leaves are green, and money can be known as green, like money is currency can sometimes be called green, but you don't know that your opponent is going to know exactly what you're talking about. And the tricky thing is that if you guess incorrectly, it's bad for your team. Codenames Duet takes that basic version where you're still trying to draw connections between words with a one-word clue and then a letter or a number, but you are trying to guess a certain amount of words within a very strict turn limit. You have 9 turns in the game before you have to complete your objective. And the tricky thing is that there are assassin cards, and if you guess, if you give a clue incorrectly and your teammate guesses an assassin card, one of the cards on your side of the grid that shows as black, you instantly lose the game. So you're already on the clock because you want to try and get all of the words guessed in your time limit, but also you have to be really careful because let's say, for instance, that one of the assassin cards on your side of the table, I don't know, is tree. Surely you wouldn't want to give a clue of green when the assassin word is tree, but maybe you didn't see that, or maybe you didn't draw that connection, and your teammate says, oh, green, tree, and then you both lose. So you have to be very careful, and the core aspects of Codenames are great. It's such a fun brain teaser where you're trying to look at these words on the table and say, how can I make this connection? How can I creatively give a clue that lets my teammate know these are the words I want you to guess? Fantastic game, and Codenames Duet is a really great experience if you're playing with 2 players. Alright, now the next game I want to talk about is The Fox and the Forest. Now, The Fox and the Forest is a delightfully simple game that is deceptively simple as well. Fox and the Forest is a 2-player trick-taking game, which already is a unique thing for me. I know that there are 2-player trick-taking games out there. I've heard of them, but I haven't played a ton. So Fox and the Forest being a trick-taking game designed for 2 players is already intriguing. But this game is so very simple in so many ways. You play one card out, and then your opponent plays a card, and then someone wins the trick. There is also a trump suit in this game where if you are not able to follow what was led, then you can play a different card. And if you play a trump suit, then you will win that trick. But the beautiful thing about The Fox and the Forest is every odd-numbered card in the game has a special ability, and these abilities are so cool. They can drastically change the way the game is played. You can change out the trump suit. You can change who gets to lead. You can do all of these cool things that drastically change the way that the game comes out. But in addition to that, you also want to be very careful because there's an ideal number of tricks that you want to win in each round to get the most points. All of that together, whenever you play the game, especially if you play it 2 or 3 times and really learn the intricacies of the game and how all of these cards can affect gameplay, you start to just realize how much of a joy this game is to play. And it's super simple to set up, super simple to teach, and then you can play it for days and days and days. I mean, this is one of those games that provides so much depth, especially once you really learn it and you know how the game works. It can be so tense and such a tactical game, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily feel mean, especially if your opponent knows what you can play. Then it really starts to be fun, the cat and mouse game that you'll play about when these cards will hit at a certain time and what abilities am I going to use and when. Fox and the Forest is a fantastic 2-player game. Alright, so the next game that I want to talk about is Seven Wonders Duel. And Seven Wonders Duel is a fantastic two-player game. There was a game that came out a while ago called Seven Wonders, and Seven Wonders was this fantastic, and is this fantastic drafting game that'll play up to 7 players. And there are variants out there where you can play a two-player version of Seven Wonders, but it wasn't really that good and it didn't feel like the same experience. Seven Wonders Duel was designed specifically for 2 players, but it still holds all of the same tension and decisions in the full Seven Wonders game, but it just shrinks it down to a much more focused experience. And the way that this game works is you play over 3 ages, and you are building a city, and you're building different buildings and locations within your city to hopefully have the most prestigious and glorious civilization at the end of the game. This game has so many decisions. You can go for 3 different types of victory conditions. You can go for a military victory, which can end the game early. You can go for a scientific victory, which would also end the game early. Or if no one is able to end the game with one of those early conditions, you can also just go for straight points. But there are so many decisions because so many different cards will matter. You have 4 different wonders that you can potentially build in the game, and each of these wonders will give you points and this really cool ability. Maybe you'll have a bonus to when you try and do military things. Maybe you'll have points for every scientific card that you have at the end of the game, or maybe you'll get to draw scientific tokens as a bonus immediately when you build the wonder. There's all these crazy cool things that you can do with the different wonders in the game, and you get to draft from a selection of all of the wonders at the start of the game, so you can kind of pick which wonders you want to go for. But in addition to that, during the game, you can go for different types of victory conditions. You can go for a military victory. There's a shared token in the middle of the board that will go back and forth towards the opposing players. As you gain military cards, you can push that token towards your opponent, and the farther you go, you make your opponent lose money, and you can potentially win the game that way if you can drive the military token all the way into your opponent's capital. Or you can go for a scientific victory. There are buildings that have different scientific symbols, and they'll give you points at the end of the game, but every time you get a pair of scientific symbols, you also get to draw from these progress tokens in the middle of the board that will give you really cool abilities, or just one-time bonuses. So there's all these decisions to make, and you're constantly trying to decide, okay, which route do I want to go? There's building chains where you can get free buildings later if you build a certain type of building. So if you want to focus only on blue buildings, that might help you build more powerful blue buildings for free. Just so many cool aspects to this game, and it's a fantastic experience. It's relatively affordable for the type of game that you're going to be getting, for the amount of game that you'll be getting in this box. I couldn't recommend Seven Wonders Duel more. Okay, so the last game that I want to talk about is Patchwork, and Patchwork is a fantastic game. This is a game that the experience is almost as warm and welcoming as the quilt that you're trying to build on your board. This game is the type of game that makes coffee taste better. It's one of those games that makes you just want to sit in your living room or at your coffee table or at your kitchen table and just have a wonderful experience with another person playing a fantastic game. The core aspect of Patchwork is so simple. You have a quilt board that's completely empty in front of you, and you're drafting tiles from around this circular track, and you can only pick one of 3 tiles based on where this player marker is. But you're just trying to buy patches to put on your board to completely fill your board as quickly as you can. But there are 2 different resources in this game. There are buttons and there's time. And on each patch, it's going to cost a certain number of buttons, and it will also cost a certain number of time. So for each time that a patch costs, you have to move your marker in the middle of the board that many spaces. And you only have a set number of movement before you are done, before the game is over. So you can move around this circular or kind of swirling track until you get to the very middle of it, and then the game is over for you. You can't buy any more patches. So there's this constant balance that you have to keep in mind. You want to try and buy patches that will fill up as much space as possible, that won't move you very far on the board, because you want to have as many turns as you possibly can to fill in your board, because at the end of the game, if you haven't completely filled in your board, you will lose points for every empty square on your board, and it can be a lot. The first 2 or 3 times I played this game, I ended with a negative score, just because I didn't really know what to go for. There's a constant balance in this game where you're trying to say, okay, this tile doesn't cover up that many spaces and it's kind of expensive, but it has 2 buttons on it. And every time you pass a button on the middle board, the time tracking board, you get a button back for every button that you have on your board. So you kind of have this engine building aspect where you're trying to place out patches that have buttons that will pay you back. But then you also want to try and fill up as much of your board as you can, because if you have empty spaces, that can hurt in a big way at the end of the game. This game is such a simple distillation of a much larger game experience that Juve was working on. At the time, he was designing a Feast for Odin, and there's a small part of a Feast for Odin that involves Tetris placement, a polyomino piece placement. And while he was designing that game, he had the idea for Patchwork. And after he designed Patchwork, he designed so many other polyomino games, the whole Garden trilogy, or whatever it's called, the Cottage Garden, Indian Summer, and Meadow, something Meadow. But I still think that Patchwork is the most is the greatest version of a polyomino game that he's designed, because it's so simple, it's so smart, and the theme is so fun and cute. And there's so many versions of this game coming out now. There's the original version of Patchwork, there's the Americana edition, I think there's going to be the Christmas edition. There's all kinds of versions of this game, but I think that it is a fantastic choice for anybody who wants a really great experience that can provide you tons of depth and tons of replayability. Alright everybody, that was the video. Hopefully this video was helpful and informative to you. Maybe you saw some games in this list that you haven't tried out yet, or games that you've heard about, but hopefully this video will inspire you to go check them out if you don't already own these games, and at least watch a video on how they're played, because I really think they're great games. There are so many honorable mentions of games that I could talk about on this list, but I just didn't have the time. I wanted to try and keep it to 5. Games like Caper and Foothills and Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small, and Fields of Arle. I mean, so many fantastic 2-player games, but bang for the buck, value for the price and what you're going to get in the box. These 5 games really continue to stand out for me as games that provide consistent value, that have tons of depth, that can really take a lot of time to explore and really play them out. These games continue to provide value for me. I think they're going to stay in my collection for a really long time. And more importantly, they're going to stay in my collection, but they're also going to get played continuously over and over again. These games are ones that I will keep in my collection, hopefully for forever. So, and I think that they will warrant that type of place in my game collection. So, if you have suggestions of games that you like, once again, I haven't played every type of game, so leave comments below. Let me know games that you think are great at 2 players, and maybe I'll learn something from you. Or if you disagree with me, leave the comments below. I will have a hearty debate any day about board games, because I could talk about board games all day. But other than that, thanks again so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you at the table.